There's a saying that I have really gravitated to lately. A man receives two educations, the one given to him and the one he gives himself. The work we're doing here today is for the children, right? That's the education we're giving to them. But what we're really doing is the education that we give ourselves. And I believe that history will remember this time. If our audio and our video is working well, if you can hear me, if you can see me in the chat box, put a number 1. Nice. Kathy, I see you. I'd like to welcome you to Design to Disrupt and Reimagine Education. This is our third of 3 conversations that have allowed the community to come together in conversation to better understand this experience. During talk 1, we heard directly from our educators about COVID teaching, right? Pandemic teaching. During number 2, we took a look at how a community came together to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And this talk is designed to explore how we can build ecosystems for learning, come together as a community to support educators, students, parents, families, education stakeholders. My name is Neferteri Strickland, and today you'll hear from professionals who are on the ground doing the work. Daniel Aguirre is going to emphasize the importance of listening. Seems simple, right? Just listen. Benita Gordon is going to show us why we all need bias training. And 2 leaders from physical spaces in our community will share how they're working to support the future of education. And we'll even hear from an educator directly preparing for this school year. During our time together, I encourage you to use the chat to ask questions. They have the little hand emoji if you have anything that you want to unmute yourself and say. In some areas, schools, they've begun. In others, like the greater Philadelphia area, just weeks away. In the chat box, what is one word on how you're feeling about the 2020-2021 year or 2021 school year? One word. Sad. It's powerful, though. Concerned. Worried. Unprepared. Pivotal. Apprehensive. Frustrated. What can we do with this energy? How can we harness this time? Daniel, you've been leading a lot of efforts in STEM. You're a champion for STEM, supporting various grassroots efforts. If you all don't know, Daniel works to make accessibility possible for the underserved. Currently, he is working in a community where ecosystems in the STEM space across the United States really are looking for opportunities to emphasize the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion. And he is a champion for listening. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Thank you for having me again. I'm so excited to be here.
I see the big smile. You made a career of listening, yes?
Yeah, I have. It's funny how you you don't realize all the things that don't go on your resume. You know, and like culturally speaking, I think about very early on all the things that my parents instilled in me and the lessons that they forced me to learn and how much they show up in my professional life now. And listening was one of those things that from a very early age, I didn't know I was being trained in. So yeah, that's, you know, talk about like the education you provide for yourself, right?
Listening is that forgotten skill. Yeah. Today, it's one of those soft skills that really should be called power skills, right? So since the pandemic, you served the community by hosting listening sessions across the country. What was that like?
Yeah, so right at around April, March, April, May, in that time frame, I think that's when the pandemic like really like smacked the United States in the face and said, whoa, we're going. I think for me, like the most visceral like way that showed up was schools closing down. And and this distance learning word propped up, right? And there was this mad dash from a lot of organizations, museums, science centers, nonprofits, educational institutions, all kinds, who just flooded everyone with all these digital resources. And I just sat there being really upset that all these families that don't have access to the internet or to reliable internet, or limited access to devices, families who are like prioritizing laptop time for work instead of school, like all of these digital resources are being pumped out and all these families are being forgotten. And one of the things that came to mind for me was the achievement gap. And that was the wrong word to use, achievement gap, because it wasn't that they were achieving, it was an accessibility, an access gap. Instead of sitting around being mad, I said, well, I'm just gonna, it doesn't matter if I get paid to do this or not. Like, I'm gonna organize community listening sessions with people from around the country who are experiencing the digital divide or who serve people who are experiencing the digital divide. And let's just have a real conversation. Let them have a real conversation with each other about their realities instead of making assumptions about what their needs are. You know, and so like, even when I hear underserved, like, our community is underserved, or is it that they don't know how to access the services that exist? You know, so like I kept coming back to that word of accessibility. And one thing that I could do is try to create a safe space for people to talk about those realities and learn from the voices, the people that decided to share their voices with us. And we landed on 4 different groups, people groups, students, parents and guardians, teachers, and social emotional learning practitioners. And there were 4 different conversations where these groups came together to have conversations with each other. And those conversations are available. I'm happy to share links to those. And it's funny because I've been listening to NPR lately, and they've been doing several segments on education. And I'm just thinking about these conversations that took place in June. And everything that was said in June is still real today. And yet, what are we doing about it? We're no further along, right? These realities didn't change in a couple of months. We're still in the same place of frustration, apprehension, unprepared, worried, concerned, sad. Like, all of those things are still real. They were real in June.
We took the summer off, Daniel. We took our summer break.
We took the summer off, and like, we deserve to take the summer off, right? But leadership didn't deserve to take the summer off, because leadership needed to be there preparing and providing those tools and resources for families and for teachers to be able to come back prepared to tackle this challenge. We didn't put in the work, right? And it's really overwhelming. Right now, I'm just listening to teachers, and I've maintained contact with all of these teachers, and it's maddening to hear the realities that they're still trying to navigate, and that school is starting and they still have no idea what they're doing, right? And some schools have started, and now they're closing down.
So I have a question. I'm sure everyone on this session has heard, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? I struggle sometimes with educators because I don't hear from them what they need. I hear from administrators, I hear from the institutions pushing out information, but I don't hear from a human being how I can help. And I think that is so important. There's somebody that I want to introduce you to. He's a pathfinder in the greater Philadelphia area. Will Toms is the co-founder of Rec Philly, a co-working space for creatives. And he and I have had discussions, or at least one discussion, right? Well, about the creative genius that he serves, the individuals at Rec Philly, some, I won't categorize, some didn't find their genius when they were going through the pre-K through 12 system. They found their genius after. So, Will, would you introduce yourself, share what you do, who you are, and the mission of your organization?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. First, thank you for having me. As mentioned, my name is William Toms. I am the co-founder, chief creative officer of a company called Rec. And here in Philadelphia, we're known as Rec Philly. And essentially what we're all about is empowering creative people to do more of what they love. And, what that most times looks like is providing the access to the resources, the strategies, and the opportunities for creative folks to not only continue creating, but also to create businesses around their art, right? They come in as as artists, and we really challenge them to see themselves as entrepreneurs. And that's through all sorts of educational programming we have. And one of the things that I know Neferteri and I were talking about that may be relevant to this conversation is, as someone who has had the opportunity to go to Philadelphia public school and then also to go to public school in a neighboring county, I got to see that access gap that was mentioned earlier, right? I got to see it as clear as day. And one of the things that I knew for myself as a young creative person, as Neferteri kind of queued up, is like, my genius was not developed, much less acknowledged, right? In certain spaces in the public school systems. And for us, when we started talking about creative entrepreneurship to our folks in our program here at Rec, which we serve 18 and up, right? You have to be an adult to be a part of our program. I knew that there was a huge opportunity for us to be able to communicate these ideas to a 14, 15, 16-year-old in high school, right? I knew what it would have done for me if I was being taught outside of, the basics of the curricula, that exists in high school, about ownership, right? About equity, about how I can take these passions and gifts and actually build a livelihood instead of telling our young people that are creative, hey, what's plan B, right? So one of the things that we're working on right now that we've been up to for about 2.5 years is we actually teach our curriculum here at Rec to our artists, and then we pay those same artists and members to then go into the high schools to teach creative entrepreneurship there. So we've got a couple different programs operating in the city now. And I just want to say, like, when we talk about achievement and achievement gaps, it's astonishing at what happens when, one, a young person has someone who looks like them, comes into their space, affirms them, and then shows them some clear, tangible skills about how to take the passion and build it into a productive business. It's like night and day, right? And I think that I've learned so much from the young people, right, of just being in those classrooms myself. And I hope that as we go into this new era, this new normal of education, we don't forget that part, right? Meeting a young person where they are and just honing in on the skills that they already have in order to then close the perceived achievement gap that we're discussing.
Thank you, Will. So Daniel, he comes in contact with these ecosystems all over the country. We have two that are in our immediate area. One that covers the Montgomery, Delaware, Bucks and Chester counties, and then right there in Philly that covers that 230 some odd schools. How do we, Daniel, take a resource that came out of the public school system in our area, like Will, and bring him into our world to support the work that needs to be done yesterday?
I think that there's a bridge that needs to be made first, right? Like, so what is the bridge between Will and the ecosystem, and how does Will's voice become an integral part of the ecosystem efforts, right? Because what Will's talking about is equity. At the core of what he's talking about is equity. Which, like, I'm blown away by by Will a little bit right now. But like that work that he's doing with those students, he used the word empower, right? And I think that I want to challenge that word, because I think Will recognizes something really important, is that the kids that he works with have power. he's not giving them any power. He's not empowering them to do anything. He's putting a big, bright spotlight on that power and then connecting them to the resources that it's going to nurture their power. That to me is the role of an ecosystem, is how do you take what's already happening and make that an integral part of the survival of a community, right? Because that is what makes an ecosystem thrive in nature. So it shouldn't be any different when we talk about it as a STEM ecosystem. I think that's where a lot of ecosystems fall short in understanding how equity plays a role in all of their efforts, can play a role in all of their efforts, and really understanding what are we even talking about when we say equity, right? And I think that so many times voices like Will's are missing from the conversation. So where is that bridge to bring Will into that conversation and to say, hey, let's put a spotlight on Will's power and let's actually believe what he's saying? Because there's the other part of it, right? It's like, do we believe what is being said by the community? Because it's not a new conversation. We've been saying Black Lives Matter for a really long time. It's not a new conversation. But people don't believe it. So that belief piece, so there are bridges that need to be made.
I would love to just jump in and ask a question to the group, Neferteri, if that's okay with you.
Please.
So I want to be mindful of how I ask this question. So we're talking about education at large, and I'll use ourselves for an example. You know, our program that we have, again, it's been running for a couple of years. We started our conversations with the school district before we were in any other schools or institutions. Got a bit of lip service, I'll just say that politely, from the school district, the public school district. Love it, so excited to do it, right? But they're still not a client of ours, whereas we now have 3 other institutions who have accepted our programming, have, you know, re-upped the contracts, we're doing such great work. And I'm offering this to the group, what do you think the challenge is specifically with the public school system to be willing to take the perceived risk, if that even exists at this point, on programs like the ones I'm describing? What is the challenge of the public school sector versus some of the charters and these hybrid model schools that we see emerging in our city specifically? If anyone's willing or you know, to take a stab at that.
Will, we don't have that time to even dive all the way into that pool, honey. So I'm gonna do it real quick in 30 seconds. So one, you have to do exactly what we're here to do. We literally have to dismantle and uproot the traditional way we do school, public school, period. That's why your charter schools, that's why Daniel and his community activism, that's why you're able to be effective in that, because when we're thinking outside of the box, we're gonna, we don't even have a box. Everybody can just come join and let's see what's going to happen. Let's see what's going to work. Matter of fact, we know it's going to work because Will already said that once I got it. Daniel already said once I was involved in this, it changed my life. So when you are consistently in a box, I am going to give you the lip service. Matter of fact, in the chat, I already said, like, we're yelling, screaming, crying, busting our head against the door for change. And then even, who said that? Bryan was like, yeah, and they give you the lip service and they say it's not in the budget, and it kind of shuts us down. And so I think that you and everyone else, you keep knocking on the door. I am totally in belief that, and I say it all the time on my podcast and on my Instagram when I'm working with people, what we did in March 2020, we can never go back to that. Whatever we were doing up until March 2020, we can never go back to that type of education. And so now is the time. Keep talking to them, get the parents involved, push down the wall, get your students involved, and all of that.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that, Benita, because that's 100% true. And to Lakeisha's point earlier from the chat, it's like, I think teachers are feeling silenced because of how often they do try to use their voice. I feel like, you know, they've they've been feeling silenced. But to me, you don't, approaching the district is one thing because you need that buy-in at the top, but you also need that buy-in at the ground floor, right? And that's the teachers, and building relationships with teachers who see the value of the program that you're offering, and then partnering with a local business to say, hey, you know, this is responsive to the community that you're trying to serve, and this is what it would cost to serve them. You know, building that relationship from the ground floor is going to help these people up here see the value of it, because they're not thinking about the ground floor. The ground floor. They're thinking about they're not thinking about equity. They really aren't. I've yet to encounter a school district that is like, yeah, equity first, and here's how, and this is what we mean, right? Like, I don't know. I don't see that. Does anybody else see that? But we need to, those relationships on the ground floor are really what make things move.
So for me, and I'm not a local. I've been here a little over 4 years, so I'm still in my observation. Started to dip my toe in the community phase, but I'm analytical by nature. And for me, with REC in Philly, there's an organization out in the suburbs, and I feel like it's kind of like a bookend to the community. Just like REC in Philly proper, Ryne Anthony and his team at Flux in Norristown, they're doing their part to support the ecosystem as well. And Ryan, you're here. Would you unmute yourself? Would you share with us who you are, what you believe, and how you support education?
Sure, yeah. Just first off, thanks for involving me. And already it's been an awesome conversation. Kind of piggyback off what Will was saying and Benita. I think part of it is, you know, real quick, I'll put my 2 cents in. I'm actually a former 8th grade science teacher that was passionate about STEM education and creating these learning opportunities for students to kind of be more hands-on. But I think that big word that kind of lingers over everything is the standardization and what's being assessed and what are we being graded on, and that's linked to finances. And I think that really puts a wrench in the whole system, because you look at all these creative programs and things that we know that kids need to be into. They're more engaged in that. It's not packets. They're creating, they're inventing, they're making, you know, music, media, graphics, whatever. They're just not being assessed in it, right? So, you know, I've had conversations with principals and even my own principals at former schools. I said, man, we would love to do this. We would love to do a drone program and get kids certified, but we don't get evaluated on that. And I think that's the big shift that needs to happen. And it's a big problem. And again, you know, my 2 cents into that. So I think, you know, it's a larger problem at scale. But the good thing is kind of, we're seeing pockets of it. And it kind of leads to what work we're doing right now. So again, my name is Ryne Anthony. So I started an initiative with a larger company called Flux. And our whole idea is that we know the state of education is changing, and the way kids want to learn is changing, and the way spaces are changing. So our parent company, Corbett Inc., president by the name of Bill Corbett, just kind of had this vision to take one of the spaces that he owns in Norristown and make it that space where industry can meet education. We focus on what education could be, and kind of like, you know, shed some of that positive light in the community and beyond that needs it. So being a former 8th grade science teacher, I hopped onto this right away. And I said, hey, man, if you gave me 10,000 square feet and we invited kids in the community, like, we could do some pretty cool stuff. So, you know, we started getting into these different innovations happening in education, like esports and different STEM programs and hydroponics, and kind of demystified it for schools about what learning opportunities were found through that and how it was engaging for all students. And again, being a former science teacher, you know, I never was in the boat of STEM just for the gifted. I was more STEM and STEAM for all, right? Like, I saw kids that weren't gifted, but, you know, were struggling readers or had struggle attendance in schools, excel in programs where they were hands-on and, you know, making mousetrap cars or making catapults and you know, using robotics and 3D printing and things like that, and seeing the true value and seeing them excel in it. And it kind of lit a fire on me. Like, there's no reason why this should just be for the gifted. You know, it shouldn't matter your zip code or what you have. And hearing you guys talk about equity, that's close to my heart too, is this idea about, you know, how do we even continue this online when kids don't even have internet at home, right? So we struggled with equity first in school, and now you're trying to get that equity out of school, and it's a big uphill battle, but seeing good pockets of it. So I'm in Flux right now, and up until the pandemic, we were doing like student entrepreneurial events, and again, just trying to piggyback and promote any and all programs that we see that are going to bring unique learning experiences to kids and really help local school boards and superintendents stop by and visit and kind of see what the future of education should look like. So we had a couple cool events with school districts bringing their school board and superintendents and kids and saying, hey, we don't want to like show you a picture of it. We don't want to send you a news article. We want you to come here and experience what it could be. And it's been a lot of fun. And we're starting to pick programs back up again. But again, like how can we be a resource and a solution and kind of help, right? My wife's still an educator. Her school district still doesn't really know what it's doing. And I know there's some educators here among us. And I know some frustrations of some school districts is admin. And we were talking about this earlier, but admin never really polled or asked teachers what they need, right? Or their input on it. Now I think they're going to be in big trouble where they're going to need a lot of subs because, you know, go figure, a lot of teachers have their own kids, and that's a priority in trying to figure out what to do with them. So, you know, we're kind of taking this as an opportunity to excel, right? As an opportunity to innovate. And, you know, what education looked like in March, it's kind of like, how do we turn this bad into a good, right? And a change for good and kind of transform learning. So we can be a physical place where that happens, where kids can come and, you know, safely, socially distant and all that, and still kind of be encouraged. We're setting up like a teacher co-working kind of area with some partners that have AV equipment if they need a place to kind of get outside safely and maybe stream a lesson or film a lesson. So again, trying to provide equity to all districts. You know, you might not have a streaming lab at your school, but we have tons of space here that we want you guys to use and kind of practice with it. And I'm in our Makerspace STEM lab area, and we're going to set up a camera here. So again, just don't send packets home. Let's send home some fun activities, right? Some hands-on stuff. What do kids have laying around? You know, what can we make and kind of create these STEM challenges with them? So it's been fun, and I would invite, and Will, man, I'm glad to meet you, man. I think there's a lot of collaboration that can happen, and you know, would love to come check out the spot and see how we can kind of connect partners and see how we can, you know, all ships rise and how we can promote your program and get more kids into it. So yeah, I'm all about it, man. So that was the long elevator pitch.
It was beautiful. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
We were engaged. Will, did you want to?
No, I was just agreeing with what Ryan had mentioned, and I'm just going to go ahead and drop my email in the chat. I think this is a beautiful group of minds, and for anyone who's connecting, I think I'll just go ahead and do that.
I'd like to follow up if that's okay. I know I'm not on camera today, but I like seeing everybody's faces. I'm distancing from a camera just for my own mental health today, but it's good to see a lot of you guys again. I've seen you on past discussions, but my biggest goal right now, like in response to what you're saying in my mission, even in the ecosystem work that I do, and I'm also working with a school out in Syracuse right now, getting them restarted, is having teachers take back their autonomy. For me, I think what made me a good teacher is that I actually broke a lot of rules, because in that rule breaking is when I can do what's right for my kids. And then I have the data to say, well, this is why I did it, and this is possibly why we should move forward. Like, what's going to happen? There's already not enough teachers. There's not enough administrators. If you try something new, you're not going to get fired right now when there's not enough subs, teachers, or anyone to fill these positions. So take your power back. And if there's one thing I would like to do over the next year in these roles as I'm working with teachers, it's that we take their power back. You do not have to have permission to do what's right for your kids. I don't care what a district says. I don't care what an administrator says, because again, unless it's detrimental in some way to health or some physical well-being, you're not gonna get fired right now. You're just not. So take your power back. I know that's hard to hear. That's hard for a lot of teachers to digest, but that's how I functioned for 8 years as an educator, as a middle school teacher. I just did what was best for my kids. And it ends often, sometimes went against the rules, sometimes went against standards and curriculum maps and all of that. But that's what I want us as educators to do. Take our power back. Forget what's being said, these rules, these no. We do what's best for our kids, and then we apologize later, and we give the data to back up why we did what we did. And so let's take our power back. That's all I'm gonna say.
Deep breath. Everyone, deep breath.
Right, because I'm passionate over here. Like,
it was beautifully said. Designed to disrupt and reimagine education. That is what we are here to discuss today. And we're in the midst of a pandemic, right? And we have an opportunity to exploit this opportunity opportunity, right? This window of time, controlled chaos with intention. And what I see that is required, the conversation that needs to happen at those higher echelons, is servant leadership. Those that can sign on the dotted line, give you the blessing, need to say, what do you need? I say for educators, all of us need to ask, what do you need? Mrs. Teacher, what do you need to make sure my two children have what they need? So I want to go back to what Ryan was saying. There's a couple of nuggets in there I felt when he was referring to the gifted students getting access to the STEM activities, that drones or esports, where we have, over the last few decades, decreased the funding for music and for arts. That genius that is just naturally creativity oozing out of children, and then you're not gifted. How can we tell you you're not gifted? The value system seems to be off balance, but together we can definitely get this train back on its tracks. We can cross that bridge together. I think fear is holding us back. And I think bias is blinding us in many cases. Benita, who you've heard from already, Benita Gordon is an educator with over 22 years in the field. She specializes in professional training that includes classroom management, school environment, peer pressure, anti-bullying, and bias. Benita, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you. So I had a whole presentation ready, but like any good teacher, you go with the flow of the classroom. So I want to start with the first poll question. We're not even gonna do all of them because it's just not gonna be relevant right now. So we're just gonna get that up while he's pulling that up. Thank you, Jake. While he's pulling that up, it should pop on your screen. Go ahead and answer that. I will not read it to you. I'm gonna give you about 20 more seconds. And so I think Neferteri already started with an amazing quote. I think that is something that creatives that I know, we all like a quote. We love a good quote to start off something. Educators, I love a good quote because it makes my kids like, what's happening? We do not really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. And so one of the things that everyone is passionate about is making sure that we're understanding the needs of the audience, our audience, parents, and our students. Look at this, 88%, thank you. So we're on the right track. And the 12% that disagree, that's okay. That goes right into what I'm going to discuss. One, it is human for us to have a bias. If your heart is pumping and you have a pulse, then you have a bias. Jake, can you skip to the third question? I don't know if that's possible. Okay, we're gonna answer this question. It was my last one, but I'm gonna do it now. Go ahead and answer this question for me. And read all your options. Now, I know you're like, what does that have to do with bias? But go with me on this. I am one of those teachers that I take you to the left and bring you all the way back to the right. So we're gonna wait for the poll to come up, 20 more seconds. Okay, so ice cream, sherbet. It's summertime, I'm still in Miami. We are on, I call it phase 1.5. I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to go somewhere or if I'm supposed to stay home. But look at this, I want everybody to look. We are spread all over the place. Chocolate, vanilla ice cream sandwich, amazingly, has the most other, and then I don't care for ice cream. Look at this. Everyone has a bias. There are two types of bias. Shout out to the ice cream sandwich crew. Two types of bias. I am the only one. I do not like ice cream, only because it does not like me back. So I leave it alone. But think about those of us who have children who do not, those of us who shop for ourselves to put our own food in the house, those of us who have a spouse, a partner, a significant other. When you go shopping, you are biased. We are biased to brands. In this house, it's 7 of us in this house. We have 2 that cannot have milk, so I get the kind of ice cream that's non-dairy. Everybody else can have whatever they want. They text me what they want. And my father is a brand person. Like, don't bring what's on sale. That's not gonna work in this house. We are bougie brand people. It must be this particular brand. And that's our bias, and that's okay. Implicit bias is this. Hold on, let me find my notes. I'm sorry, explicit bias, we're gonna start there. Explicit bias are the beliefs and attitudes we endorse at a conscious level. That's what we do with ice cream. When I go on Yelp and I leave a review for a restaurant, when we are trying to plan our vacations as soon as we come out of COVID quarantine, what's the best Airbnb? What's the best place to go? All of those are our bias. Right? I see in the chat, Hellman's mayonnaise or Miracle Whip. That's a bias. Do not come in our house with anything other than Miracle Whip. You will get sent back to the store. On the other hand, somebody in here was like, if you bring anything in other than Hellman's, you will get sent back to the store. So that's our bias. Look at, oh my, that's the bias. We use that and without thinking. It's what we put on our Facebook page, on our Twitter. The teams we rock, their clothing. I lived in Pensacola, Florida for a minute. And Alabama people, either you were born into Alabama family or Auburn family, period. Do not debate that. I'm from Virginia, so you're either Virginia Tech or you're UVA, the end. So those are our bias. Those bias are okay. No harm, no foul. A little bit of that bias is also when we're in school, who we sit with. You sit with the vegetarians are going to sit together mostly. Vegans are going to sit together mostly. The junk food crew, that was me. We're going to sit together eating our Swiss cakes and drinking our Mountain Dew for lunch. That was me. And that was actually the whole Chili squad. We needed to go back and look at that again. But it's when we get into our implicit bias in education that we now have a problem. And that goes back to what I've heard several of you say, where we're talking about talented and gifted. And when we look at the numbers and we look at how are we saying who's gifted and talented, that goes back to our explicit bias. So explicit bias is something we recognize and share. Implicit bias are preferences, beliefs, and attitudes we have about people. The best way I explain it is this. As an educator or as a person, I have my sticker, I have my shirt, I marched Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is everywhere. I truly believe that Black Lives Matter. I truly believe that the killing of unarmed Black men and women in America is disproportionate, and it has been for years. But when I go out downtown on South Beach in Miami, with me and my girls, and we see a group of Black men walking, we immediately cross the street. If I had some tea, I would sip it now. This is when we have to check our bias. And remember I said, if you're breathing and you're human, you have 2 types of bias. And so this is when people get uncomfortable in my sessions, because then they go, not me. I would never do that. Well, let me flip the script for you. My name is Benita Gordon. I grew up in rural Virginia. I went to an HBCU. There on campus were construction workers. The construction workers were white. A number of times we had to walk past these construction workers, and myself, along with my Black female friends, crossed the street. We were scared of the white construction workers. And I know people were like, what? How? You have to understand how we were raised and the bias that's already in us. And so it was one day in the cafeteria, I pointed it out, we laughed about it, and then we got quiet. Because now we have to unpack some stuff that we didn't even know was down in there as 18 and 19-year-olds. Girl, why did we cross the street? Like literally we're in the cafeteria, in the caf, as we call it, having a conversation. So when we decide to disrupt something, you have to dig deep and do a self-reflection. Why did I do that? I just marched in this Black Lives Matter and was no problem, no issues, no concerns. But unconsciously, without thinking, I immediately crossed the street. The reason we brought it up today is we want to start looking at that, because I'm a good old country girl. We can cut down a tree all day. We can cut down the whole forest. But if you don't want it to grow back, we have to get the uprooter machine and literally uproot that stump. Or the little trees will grow around it. In 10 years, we'll have another forest. So one of the reasons we added this to this point today is to let's have a conversation about how we disrupt. Equity is real. We've spoken about it 4 or 5 times on here today. That goes back to a bias and is deep rooted. And so I don't want anybody to feel bad about yourself. I want you to do a self-reflection, because it could be something as simple as crossing the street. That doesn't make you a bad person. That just makes you have to say, why did I do that though? Like what in me made me fearful at that moment of the same thing that I do believe in? The same people I believe in. I've worked in inner city schools all of my 23 years. And I've had teachers look at me and say, I'm scared of my students. Huh? The ones you teach every day? You can't be scared of them, because then that's when the bias keeps me from putting them in that gifted class. That's when that bias keeps Ryan and, wait, let me get his name right, Will group from coming into my program, because I feel like they don't deserve it or they can't handle it. And the biggest thing I always hear, and I'm going to end here, is the bias where it's their behavior. It's their behavior. Go ahead. I'm going to wrap it up. Go ahead, Neferteri. Go.
Well, actually, Daniel, I know he wanted to chime in, but you just struck a nerve.
I'm
Those
sorry.
on the line that know my son, when he was in 3rd grade, tested off the charts, but he talked too much.
Oh.
So he couldn't be in the gifted program. And I have been carrying so much of that. Daniel, go ahead. Let me take some breaths.
Okay.
Breathe, girl. Breathe.
That's serious.
It's maddening. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Benita. Like, just, like for real. You know, so out of the listening that happens, comes like the understanding how to listen, and then you can listen to understand, right? And so one of the things that I've been listening to in national conversations and dialogues is the issue of racism, right? And how we do not talk about, we don't talk about race, right? We don't normalize talking about race within our institutions. And when I've been listening to these national dialogues, the issue is being presented as black and white. Literally, it's black and white, right? Black Lives Matter, white America. When in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's a lot deeper than that. So the next round of listening sessions that we're doing are exactly about that. Because as an immigrant to this country from Mexico, I understand the challenges within my own country of colorism, of sexism, of homophobia. And in the Black community, there's a lot of that as well, right? And in the Afro-Latino community, in case some of you didn't know, Afro-Latinos are a thing. Like that, you know, is also very present. So we're putting together, not putting together, it's together, a conversation about between Latinx and the Black community and Afro-descendant communities to talk to each other about, like, what are some of the, it's 3 conversations. So what are the cards that we need to put on the table about our own cultures, and what are the things how do things show up that turn into resentment between our efforts, and that things that prevent us from aligning our voices and our efforts. And then also understanding our intersections. So in conversation 2, it is about, like, where are all those intersections? What is somebody who identifies as an Afro-Latina and an African-American, and how do those things intersect, right? And then we can talk about healing with that understanding in mind, with those cards on the table. How do we start to heal, right? So the first time we did listening sessions, the entire audience was forced to join in listen only mode. So whatever agenda you had or whatever questions you wanted to ask, we didn't make space for that, because what was important was highlighting the realities of the people that were sharing their voice, and just pause and listen for a moment and hear what people have to say. So we're doing that again, but this time, and I'm curious about what you think, Benita, and what everyone else thinks. This time what we're asking people to do is exercise, put in some work, and identify a listening partner from another race or culture that you're already connected to listen to these conversations and process together from your own cultural lens and lived experience, and have these conversations with each other. So that's coming up, and I've been like a wreck about it, because language is one of those things that is ever evolving. And so, like, I put out an invitation for this, and so, like, I stumbled through it, but in August of 2020, these are the words that we have, and so, like, this is how I'm putting it out. Anyway, I just threw a lot of stuff at everyone, but I think that it's part of it, right? Like having these intersectional conversations are really important.
It is, and we appreciate you sharing. I know if you want to get this information, there'll be a survey. Daniel, if you don't mind dropping the survey in the chat, don't fill it out now, but it'll be there for you. And if you'd like the links to the talk, the listening series, please go ahead and do that. Will, we see you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. So I want to move forward. We have about 10 minutes left, because I believe that education, that's the next crisis, right? Teachers are the new frontline workers. So if we talk about exposing students to entrepreneurship, what and where is the value in exposing educators to that same sense of entrepreneurship, to develop entrepreneurial thinking, to be adaptable in the classroom, give them a little bit of freedom of movement, so it's not breaking the rules as much as exercising their control, power, their capability to teach in the way that best serves their students. If you believe that our education system can and is willing to allow teachers to exercise that entrepreneurial mindset, put a 1 in the chat. If you do not believe that they will allow these teachers to exercise that entrepreneurial mindset, put a 2 in the chat. 1.5, Benita. 2, Tracy, Jake. I see a lot of 2s. You guys just took Christmas away from me. Thank you. 1.5, I saw another 2.
So I really quick before you, this morning I watched the news, because I try not to watch. I literally have my TV off and I just listen to podcasts, because it's overwhelming at times, just everything. But this morning I heard New Jersey teachers said they were not going to return to the classroom. And then the governor of New Jersey said, oh, well, now we're going to do remote. Did anybody else hear that? Because for that one moment, I felt the power of the educator. for me, that was like amazing, because it's not that we don't want to go back. It's that you were not ready to receive us safely. And that's what it is. Like, whenever somebody always comes at me and be like, oh, you just don't want to go back because you want to stay at home with your own kids. Well, I don't have children, first of all. And second of all, that's not it. Your children are my children, but it's a simple fact that it's not safe. It's not safe for me to come back and I have a 75-year-old father here at home who has underlying heart condition. It's not safe. And I know it may not be safe for my students at home either. I just know the population of students I work with. So I'm trying to figure out how it can be safe. And the teachers were like, we don't see it yet. And I think that's the biggest thing, where me being as an entrepreneur, we're trying to give suggestions and it goes back to nobody's listening to us again.
Mm. So I think part of the solution is trust. As a parent, I want to trust the educator that works with my child. And I want to have that direct dialogue where I will give them permission, whether it's verbal or not, to make the decisions, those judgment calls on the ground, because I believe that they will use the best judgment. And I need my educators to trust me as a parent that I will back them up. So if you're an educator in the room, in the chat, please put what you need. If you're an educator in the chat, what do you need? Bueller? Support. What does that mean? How can I support you? I see better technology that we can do. Let's revisit the support programs. Listening to teachers, they have no power. I hear you. So we want to create the conditions to support the scholars, the children, the babies, the workforce of the next generation, however we want to refer to them. And I do believe that the best way is to support those educators. So I've invited Bryan Carter into the conversation. As needs emerge, Bryan, we really want to hear from you as an educator preparing to go back to school in Philadelphia. How can we support you as those needs emerge? Is it communication? In communication channels? What do you need?
So, good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. As the needs emerge, I believe that parents should give the response what they're getting on the reception from the teacher, because that better helps us to understand what we need to be doing on our end. And then also, if they're listening in, which was something I learned while doing virtual teaching at the end of the semester. If they're listening in, they hear what the subject material is about, then lend an expert, make a suggestion, things like that. Like, parents are now in a position where they can further enhance the education process, because we're really a conversation away if they're required to be at home. So as the school year goes on and as the needs emerge, as needs emerge, what you can do to support us is, like I said, just give a listening ear, but also help to direct some traffic or give some suggestions, because there are some struggling teachers. We're going to have a first generation of teachers who have never been in the classroom. How are they being assisted? What feedback are they getting from parents to better service their own kid? So I think feedback for right now.
That's important. And it makes me think about where I am, and when it even threatens to storm out here, we lose power, right? So if my children are on Zoom or some type of virtual platform learning and they lose power, unless they knew what was about to be taught next, there's nothing that's going to happen from that point on. So having that dialogue, or at least parents being tuned in to help act as that catalyst for learning offline when the screens are off, I think that's really important. So when the student leaves their house, what community resources should be available to reinforce the learning that you're providing in the classroom or that virtual classroom?
Well, definitely one, I say the library. You know, whenever I have a question, whenever I have an inquiry, I go to the library. For those that don't know, you can download the books and access information online through the web. But that's what I learned. I can literally rent a book from the library and download it. So you have the library, you have community leaders. Who in the community is an expert on some of the subject matter that your student is being exposed to? Who's the go-to guy in the community, and not just in the initial neighborhood, but the family member. So one of the things I've started to see or just notice with myself, there's been more of a tug to educate my younger family members. There's been a more of a tug to call on my area of expertise. So who are the experts, you know, who has the intellectual currency in your household, in your neighborhood, to alleviate some of these things, or tutor some of the students that are experiencing maybe areas of growth in the classroom.
Thank you. And we're almost at a time, so I want to make sure that this is said. With the overwhelming response in the chat that education as an institution is not going to support entrepreneurial thinking, I believe that we should continue to design to disrupt. I really do feel as though that entrepreneurial mindset is going to be a differentiator for educators and those that they serve. So I'd like to invite you to the Edpreneurs Roundtable. It'll be right here at Venture Cafe on the 10th of September from 5 to 6. Daniel, if you don't mind putting that link in the chat. And then if you have any thoughts or feedback, again, because we've run out of time, there's a survey link in the chat. You can leave your information, leave your email address. If you'd like to continue to be a part of this conversation, we would love to have you, because this is work that's going to be village work. This is work that's going to be work of the tribe. So there is just a minute left. Benita, what are your thoughts?
I just think that the conversations that we've had here and the connections for the 3 sessions, I definitely want us to continue, but right where you are in your community, in your school district, all voices matter, all votes matter, and all voices matter. That's it. Tell them what you need. Tell them what you expect. These are your scholars. These are your children. These are your nieces and nephews, your grandkids. And it's important that we prepare them for what the innovation that's coming. We have to prepare them. We're going into a different type of technology, and it's the innovative one. And so unless we get that critical thinking kicked in, we're going to be behind the 8 ball every time.
Thank you, Benita. Daniel, I'd like to give you the last word.
Understand how to listen so that you can listen and understand. Everybody, all the important things were said today. Teachers, it seems like teachers don't have power on the surface, but they do. And it's about putting a spotlight on that power and continuing to amplify that and partnering as a parent from where you are, to Benita's point, from where you are as a community organizer. How can I amplify parents and how can I amplify teacher voice and put their power on full display?
So thank you once again for joining us. We're going to continue the work. As Benita said, where you are, do the work. It's a marathon, not a race. Have a good evening.